The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Windsor Castle as Catherine sat in the Queen's private drawing room, her hands trembling slightly as she held the delicate china teacup. The weight of recent events pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy cloak she couldn't remove. Through the tall windows, she could see the groundskeepers tending to the rose bushes, their movements methodical and peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had been brewing within the royal family for weeks. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the marble corridor outside, and Catherine's heart began to race. She knew those footsteps well, confident, measured, with just a hint of urgency that had become all too familiar in recent days. The ornate door opened slowly, and there stood Camilla, dressed impeccably as always, but there was something different about her expression today. Her usual composed demeanor seemed strained, as if she was carrying the weight of an impossible decision. "Catherine," Camilla's voice was softer than usual, almost hesitant. "I hoped I might find you here." The two women had shared this space countless times over the years, discussing everything from charity work to family matters, but today felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a tension that made every word feel significant. Catherine set down her teacup with care, noticing how the simple actions seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet room. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," Camilla continued, moving closer to the window where the morning light created a halo effect around her silver hair. "About the future of the monarchy, about what's best for everyone involved." Catherine felt her chest tighten. She had been dreading this moment, while simultaneously longing for it. The past few weeks had been filled with whispered conversations in palace corridors, worried glances between staff members, and an underlying sense that change was coming whether they were ready for it or not. The media speculation had reached a fever pitch, and every public appearance felt like walking through a minefield. "The children have been asking questions," Catherine said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "George came to me last night, wanting to know why everyone seems so serious lately. How do you explain to a child that the world they've always known might be about to shift?" Camilla turned from the window, her eyes meeting Catherine's with a mixture of understanding and profound sadness. "You don't have to explain anything yet. But, Catherine, I need you to know that whatever happens, whatever decisions are made, they're being made with love, with the deepest consideration for what's right." The older woman moved to sit across from Catherine in one of the antique chairs that had witnessed countless royal conversations over the decades. The fabric, worn smooth by time and important discussions, seemed to hold the weight of history itself. Between them sat a small table adorned with fresh peonies, their sweet fragrance filling the space where words seemed inadequate. "Charles has been struggling," Camilla said, her voice taking on a vulnerability that Catherine had rarely heard. "The weight of everything, the expectations, the constant scrutiny. He's been questioning whether he's truly the right person to lead the monarchy into the future." Catherine's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected this conversation was coming, had seen the signs in Charles's increasingly drawn face, in the way he seemed to age years in just weeks. But hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that terrified her. "And William?" Catherine asked, though she already knew the answer from the late-night conversations with her husband, from the way he had been pacing their private quarters, from the phone calls that stretched deep into the night. "William is ready," Camilla said simply, "perhaps more ready than any of us realized. He has a vision for what the monarchy could become, a way to honor tradition while embracing the modern world. But readiness doesn't make the transition any easier for any of us." The two women sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken implications settling between them like morning mist. Outside, a peacock called across the grounds, its cry both beautiful and haunting. Catherine found herself thinking about her children, about the life they had built together, about the careful balance they had maintained between public duty and private happiness. "What does this mean for us?" Catherine finally asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "For our family, for the children's future?" Camilla leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped together in her lap. "It means change, significant change. But it also means opportunity. The chance to shape something new, to build something that serves not just the institution, but the people it represents." The conversation continued as the morning sun climbed higher, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the room. They talked about practicalities and possibilities, about fears and hopes, about the delicate dance of duty and desire that had defined their lives within the royal family. Each word seemed to carry extra weight, each pause filled with the magnitude of what they were discussing. As the clock struck 11, Camilla stood slowly, smoothing her skirt with practiced movements. "There will be a family meeting this afternoon," she said, her formal tone returning. "Charles will want to discuss everything properly, with everyone present." Catherine nodded, knowing that this afternoon would mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The certainty she had felt about her role, about her place in this complex family structure, was about to be tested in ways she had never imagined. "Catherine," Camilla paused at the door, turning back with an expression of genuine affection. "Whatever happens, know that you've been a blessing to this family. Your strength, your grace, your ability to balance everything that's required of you, it hasn't gone unnoticed." After Camilla left, Catherine remained in the drawing room, surrounded by the quiet luxury that had become her normal world. The peonies continued to release their sweet fragrance, the clock continued its steady ticking, and, somewhere in the distance, she could hear the faint sounds of life continuing as usual. But she knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The afternoon meeting took place in Charles's private study, a room lined with leather-bound books and family photographs that told the story of generations. The heavy curtains were drawn against the bright summer sun, creating an intimate atmosphere that seemed to amplify the gravity of the moment. Catherine arrived to find William already seated, his jaw tight with tension, his usually warm eyes clouded with concern. Charles stood behind his desk, his hands resting on its polished surface as if drawing strength from the solid wood. The desk had belonged to his grandfather, and Catherine couldn't help but think about the weight of legacy that pressed down on everyone in the room. Camilla sat in her usual chair near the window, her posture perfect, but her face showing signs of strain. "I've asked you all here because we need to address the speculation that's been building," Charles began, his voice carrying the formal tone he used for difficult conversations. "The media attention has become unsustainable, and, more importantly, I've been doing some deep soul-searching about what's best for the crown." William shifted in his seat, and Catherine could see the muscles in his shoulders tense. She knew her husband well enough to read the signs of his internal struggle. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life, yet when it actually arrived, the reality felt overwhelming. "The pressures of modern monarchy are different from what previous generations faced," Charles continued. "The constant scrutiny, the immediate judgment of every decision, the way every personal moment becomes public property. I've been considering whether it might be time to step aside, to allow fresh perspectives to guide the institution forward." The silence that followed felt deafening. Catherine watched as William processed his father's words, his hands clasped so tightly in his lap that his knuckles had turned white. She wanted to reach out to him, to offer the comfort that came so naturally in their private moments. But the formality of the situation held her back. "Father," William's voice was carefully controlled, "this isn't a decision that should be made lightly or quickly. The monarchy needs stability, continuity. If you step down now, after such a short reign, what message does that send about the institution itself?" Camilla spoke for the first time since the meeting began. "Your father isn't making this decision lightly, William. We've been discussing it for months. The question isn't about his capability or commitment. It's about what serves the country best." Catherine found herself studying the family photographs on the side table near her chair. There was one of William as a young boy, standing between his parents at some long-forgotten family gathering, his face bright with innocent joy. Now, sitting across from her, that same face was etched with lines of responsibility and worry that seemed to have appeared overnight. "What about the children?" Catherine heard herself ask, surprised by the sound of her own voice in the charged atmosphere. George, Charlotte, and Louis, their entire understanding of their future, of their place in the world, would change completely. Charles's expression softened as he looked at his daughter-in-law. "The children are resilient, Catherine, and perhaps it's better for them to grow up understanding that duty doesn't always follow expected timelines, that sometimes service means making difficult choices for the greater good." The conversation continued for what felt like hours, touching on constitutional implications, public reaction, and the practical mechanics of such a momentous change. Catherine listened as lawyers and advisors were mentioned, as timelines were discussed, as the abstract concept of abdication became increasingly concrete and real. William's phone buzzed repeatedly on the table beside him, each notification a reminder of the world outside these walls that would be affected by whatever decision they reached. The weight of millions of people who looked to the royal family for stability and continuity seemed to press down on the room. "I need time to think," William finally, said, his voice hoarse from the emotional strain. This affects not just our family, but the entire Commonwealth. Every decision I would make as king would be scrutinized through the lens of how I came to the throne. Camilla reached across the space between her chair and his, placing a gentle hand on William's arm. No one is asking you to decide anything today, but we needed you to understand where your father's thoughts have been leading. As the meeting wound down, Catherine noticed how the afternoon light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the room. The family photographs seemed to watch them, silent witnesses to another chapter in the ongoing story of duty versus desire that had defined royal life for generations. There's something else we need to discuss, Charles said as they prepared to leave. The media speculation isn't going to stop. If anything, it's going to intensify. We need to be prepared for increased scrutiny of everything we do, every public appearance, every family moment. Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. She thought about her children at school, about the careful balance they had maintained between giving them normal childhoods while preparing them for their unique responsibilities. How would they handle photographers and reporters looking for any sign of family tension or change? We protect them, William said firmly, reading her thoughts. Whatever else happens, we protect our children from this circus. After the others left, Catherine and William remained in the study, surrounded by the weight of history and the uncertainty of the future. The silence between them was comfortable but heavy, filled with all the things they needed to say but weren't quite ready to voice. Are you frightened? Catherine asked quietly, moving to sit on the arm of his chair. William looked up at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and determination that she had rarely seen. Terrified, he admitted, but also strangely calm, as if this moment has been waiting for us our entire lives. They sat together as the day faded into evening, holding each other while the weight of potential kingship settled around them like an invisible crown. Outside, the normal sounds of palace life continued, staff finishing their duties, security making their rounds, the distant sounds of London carrying on its ancient rhythm. Neither of them spoke about the fact that their lives, their children's lives, and the lives of millions of people might be about to change forever. Some things were too large for words, requiring instead the quiet strength that came from facing the unknown together. 3 weeks later, the weight of unspoken decisions hung over the royal family like storm clouds gathering on a summer horizon. Catherine had thrown herself into her royal duties with renewed intensity, as if maintaining the familiar rhythms of charity visits and public appearances could somehow hold back the tide of change that everyone could feel approaching. But during quiet moments between engagements, she found herself studying William's face, searching for signs of how he was processing the magnitude of what lay ahead. The morning of the family's private retreat to Balmoral started like any other, with careful coordination of schedules and security arrangements. But there was an underlying tension that even the staff seemed to sense, moving about their duties with unusual quiet efficiency. Catherine had packed the children's belongings with extra care, as if these familiar routines could provide stability in an increasingly uncertain world. During the drive to Scotland, she watched the countryside roll past, and found herself thinking about all the times she had made this same journey, how the landscape had become as familiar as the rooms of her own home. George sat beside her, reading a book about Scottish history for a school project, his young face serious with concentration. Charlotte and Louis played a quiet game involving colored pencils and travel notebooks, their innocent chatter a counterpoint to the adult concerns weighing on everyone's minds. "Mummy, why does everyone seem so serious lately?" Charlotte asked during a stop for lunch, her perceptive eyes catching the subtle signs that her parents had tried so hard to hide. Catherine exchanged a glance with William before answering carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups have to make important decisions that take a lot of thinking. It doesn't mean anything is wrong, sweetheart. It just means we want to make sure we choose wisely." The explanation seemed to satisfy Charlotte for the moment, but Catherine noticed how William's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. They had discussed how much to tell the children, when to tell them, how to explain concepts that even adults struggled to fully understand. The balance between protecting their innocence and preparing them for reality felt more precarious with each passing day. Balmoral appeared through the Highland mist like something from a fairy tale, its stone towers and turrets rising against the backdrop of purple heather and ancient pines. Catherine had always loved this place, where the formal protocols of royal life relaxed slightly, and the family could almost pretend to be normal. Almost, but never quite completely. Charles and Camilla had arrived the day before, and Catherine could see them through the large windows of the morning room as their car pulled up the circular drive. Something about Camilla's posture suggested that the difficult conversations were far from over, that this retreat would be about more than just family time and Highland air. That evening, after the children had been settled in their rooms with hot chocolate and stories, the adults gathered in Charles's favorite sitting room. The walls were covered with family photographs spanning generations, and a fire crackled in the massive stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows that seemed to bring the ancestral faces to life. "I've spoken with the Archbishop of Canterbury," Charles said without preamble, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "And with the Prime Minister. The constitutional experts have been consulted about the procedures that would need to be followed." Catherine felt her stomach drop. The abstract possibility they had been discussing for weeks was becoming concrete reality with each word. William sat forward in his chair, his hands clasped together, his face a mask of careful composure. "The timing would be crucial," Charles continued. "It would need to be handled with dignity, with respect for the institution and for the people who have supported our family for so many years." Camilla spoke into the silence that followed. "We've also been thinking about the practical aspects. Where we would live, how we would continue to serve in whatever capacity might be appropriate." The conversation that followed was unlike any Catherine had ever experienced. They discussed constitutional law and public relations strategies, the reactions of other Commonwealth nations, and the logistics of a coronation that no one alive had ever witnessed. Through it all, Catherine found herself watching William, seeing him transform before her eyes from the man she married into someone who was beginning to accept the weight of a crown he had always known would one day be his. "The children," William finally said, his voice quiet but firm. "Whatever timeline we're looking at, they need to be told soon. They deserve to hear it from us, not to find out from schoolmates or television." Charles nodded gravely. "Of course. But, William, I need you to be certain about this. Once the process begins, there's no going back. The monarchy will look to you for guidance through what will inevitably be a period of uncertainty and change." Catherine watched her husband's face as he considered his father's words. She could see the boy who had lost his mother too young, the young man who had struggled to find his place in the world, and the father who now wanted to protect his own children from the harsher aspects of public life. All of these versions of William seemed to exist simultaneously in that moment, past and present and future converging. "I know," William said finally. "I've known since I was 12 years old that this day would come. I just never imagined it would be like this." The fire crackled and settled, sending sparks up the ancient chimney. Outside, the Scottish wind whistled around the castle's stone walls, carrying with it the scent of heather and the promise of rain. Catherine found herself thinking about all the conversations that had taken place in this room over the centuries, all the decisions that had shaped the course of British history. "There's something else," Camilla said, her voice taking on a different quality. "Something personal that we need to address." She looked directly at Catherine, her eyes filled with a mixture of affection and profound sadness. "This decision affects you more than anyone else, Catherine. Your life, your children's lives, everything you've built together will change in ways that are impossible to fully predict." Catherine felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. The weight of what Camilla was saying settled over her like a heavy blanket. She thought about the quiet moments of family life that she treasured, the school runs and bedtime stories, the lazy Sunday mornings when they could almost pretend to be an ordinary family. "I married William," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "Not a title, not a position, but the man I loved. Whatever that means for our future, we'll face it together." The conversation continued late into the night, touching on details and possibilities that would have seemed surreal just months earlier. By the time they finally retired to their rooms, the broad outlines of a plan had begun to emerge, though many details remained to be worked out. Catherine lay awake long after William had fallen asleep beside her, listening to the familiar sounds of Balmoral at night. The old building seemed to breathe around them, its stone walls holding centuries of royal dreams and decisions. Tomorrow, they would begin the process of telling their children that their lives were about to change forever. Tonight, she allowed herself to grieve for the simpler life that was about to slip away, even as she prepared to embrace whatever came next. The morning that would change everything began with deceptive normalcy. Catherine woke early to the sound of rain against the windows of their Balmoral bedroom, the Scottish weather providing a soundtrack that seemed to match her emotional state. William was already awake beside her, staring at the ceiling with the expression she had come to recognize over the past weeks, the look of a man carrying the weight of momentous decisions. They had agreed the night before that today would be the day, they told the children. The conversation had been postponed and discussed and rehearsed until every possible reaction had been considered, but now the moment could no longer be delayed. The media speculation was intensifying daily, and they refused to let their children hear rumors before they heard the truth from their parents' lips. Breakfast was served in the small family dining room, a cozy space that felt intimate compared to the grand formal rooms elsewhere in the castle. George, Charlotte, and Louis chattered about their plans for the day, excited about a nature walk that had been promised, and a visit to see the Highland ponies. Their innocent enthusiasm felt both heartbreaking and precious to Catherine, who found herself memorizing their faces as they laughed over scrambled eggs and toast. After breakfast, we'd like to talk with all of you about something important, William said, his voice carefully casual but carrying an undertone that even young Louis seemed to pick up on. Are we in trouble? Charlotte asked, her eyes wide with concern. No, darling, Catherine assured her quickly. Not trouble at all. Just some family news that we want to share with you. The conversation took place in the castle's library, surrounded by thousands of volumes that had accumulated over generations. Catherine had chosen this room deliberately. It felt less formal than an office, but more serious than the casual family areas. The children settled onto the large sofa, with George in the middle and his younger siblings flanking him, their faces showing various degrees of curiosity and concern. William began carefully, explaining that sometimes families need to take on new responsibilities, that changes could bring both challenges and opportunities. Catherine watched her children's faces as understanding slowly dawned, saw the moment when George realized that his father was talking about becoming king, saw Charlotte's eyes widen as the implications began to sink in. Does this mean we have to move away from our house? Louis asked, his young voice trembling slightly. Some things will change, yes, Catherine said gently, reaching out to smooth his hair. But we'll always be a family, we'll always be together, and we'll always love each other just the same. The questions came in a flood after that initial understanding. When would this happen? Would they have to wear crowns? Could they still go to school with their friends? Could they still play football in the garden? Each question revealed another aspect of their children's world that would be affected, another certainty that would need to be rebuilt. George, ever the serious older brother, asked the question that cut deepest. Will people treat us differently now? Will everything have to change? William's composure cracked slightly at his eldest son's mature concern. Some things will change, George. But who we are as people, as a family, that stays the same. The most important things, our love for each other, our values, our commitment to helping others, those don't change at all. The afternoon was spent in careful family activities designed to feel normal while allowing for continued conversation. They walked through the castle grounds, fed apples to the Highland ponies, and played board games in front of the fire. But underneath the surface normalcy, Catherine could feel the seismic shift that had begun with their morning conversation. It was during the evening that the call came. Charles answered his private line in the study while the family was watching a film together, and Catherine could tell from the change in his posture that something significant was happening. When he returned to the sitting room, his face was grave. The press has gotten wind of something, he said quietly, speaking to William and Catherine while the children remained focused on their movie. There are photographers gathering at the main gates, and the palace press office has been fielding calls all afternoon. The peaceful bubble of their Balmoral retreat suddenly felt fragile. Catherine thought about the children, about their innocent questions from the morning, about how quickly their sheltered world was about to be invaded by public scrutiny and speculation. We need to move up our timeline, William said, his voice tight with tension. If we're going to make an announcement, it needs to be on our terms, not in response to media pressure. That evening, after the children had been settled in bed with extra stories and reassurance, the adults gathered once more in Charles's study. This time, phones rang constantly with calls from private secretaries, constitutional experts, and government officials. The machinery of state was beginning to turn, responding to decisions that had been months in the making but now needed to be implemented in days rather than weeks. The Prime Minister wants to meet tomorrow, Charles reported after ending one particularly long call. The cabinet needs to be briefed, and there are constitutional procedures that must be followed precisely. Catherine listened to the discussions of protocols and procedures while part of her mind remained upstairs with her sleeping children. Charlotte had asked for an extra bedtime story, and Louis had wanted to sleep with his favorite stuffed animal, small signs of the uncertainty they were all feeling but couldn't fully express. What about Christmas? Catherine found herself asking during a brief lull in the phone calls. The children have been looking forward to Christmas at Sandringham. Will we still be able to have that time together as a family? The question seemed to catch everyone off guard, highlighting how even the most cherished family traditions would now need to be viewed through the lens of public duty and constitutional requirements. Camilla answered gently, "We'll make sure the children have Christmas, Catherine. Whatever else changes, we won't let this take away their childhood celebrations." As the night wore on, Catherine found herself thinking about the last time she had felt her world shift so completely. It had been when she and William first became serious, when she realized that loving him meant accepting a life that would always belong partly to the public. But this felt different, more profound. This wasn't about joining the royal family. This was about leading it. The rain continued throughout the night, drumming against the windows with increasing intensity. Catherine lay awake listening to its rhythm while William made phone call after phone call, coordinating with advisors and officials who would help guide them through the unprecedented transition ahead. In the darkness, she allowed herself to think about the woman she had been just that morning, a mother worried about school projects and ballet lessons, a wife who could still sometimes forget about the weight of royal duty. That woman felt very far away now, already becoming part of the past as the future pressed in around them with increasing urgency. Tomorrow would bring official announcements and constitutional procedures, media attention, and public reaction. Tonight was the last night they would ever be the same family they had been. The last night when William was still a prince waiting for his destiny rather than a king in waiting whose time had suddenly, irrevocably arrived. The morning of the official announcement dawned gray and drizzling, as if the Scottish weather understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. Catherine stood at the window of their Balmoral bedroom, watching the mist roll across the Highland landscape, while William spoke in hushed tones on the phone with his private secretary. The children were still sleeping, blissfully unaware that today would mark the beginning of their new reality. By 9 o'clock, the castle was buzzing with activity that felt both urgent and choreographed. Staff members moved with purpose through corridors that had witnessed centuries of royal transitions, but none quite like this one. Constitutional experts arrived by helicopter, their briefcases filled with documents that would formalize Charles's decision to abdicate in favor of his eldest son. Catherine found herself thinking about the last time she had felt this particular combination of excitement and terror. It had been on her wedding day, when she realized that walking down that aisle meant stepping into a role that would define the rest of her life. But even that momentous day paled in comparison to what she was experiencing now. The formal announcement was scheduled for noon, to be delivered simultaneously from Buckingham Palace, Balmoral, and the Prime Minister's office. The careful coordination required to manage such a historic moment was staggering. Every word had been scrutinized by lawyers, every protocol double-checked by constitutional experts, every possible reaction considered and prepared for. "The children should hear it from us first, one more time," William said during a brief break in the morning's preparations. "Before the rest of the world knows, before it becomes official, they should hear their father tell them that yes, this is really happening." They gathered the children in the same library where they had first broached the subject, but this time the atmosphere felt different. There was a finality to William's words as he explained that the conversation they had started yesterday was about to become reality, that by this afternoon, the entire world would know that he would soon be king. George, with the seriousness that had always made him seem older than his years, asked, "Will people expect us to be different now? Will we have to act like different people?" Catherine knelt down to his level, taking his hands in hers. "You never have to be anyone other than exactly who you are, George. The most important thing about being royal isn't the titles or the ceremonies. It's being kind, being helpful, and caring about other people. You already know how to do all of that." Charlotte, ever practical, wanted to know about logistics. "Will we still live in our house? Will I still go to school with Emma and Sophie?" "Some things will change gradually," William explained patiently. "But we'll always make sure you feel safe and loved, no matter where we're living or what we're doing." Young Louis, not fully understanding the implications but sensing the emotional weight of the moment, simply climbed into Catherine's lap and wrapped his arms around her neck. "I love you, Mummy," he whispered, and Catherine felt her heart both break and swell simultaneously. At 11:45, 15 minutes before the announcement would be broadcast to the nation and the world, Camilla appeared in the doorway of the library. She was impeccably dressed, as always, but Catherine noticed a tremor in her usually steady hands. This moment was as momentous for her as it was for anyone else. Her husband was about to make a decision that would reshape their lives entirely. "It's time," Camilla said simply. The adults gathered in Charles's study to watch the announcement together. The children were settled in the next room with their nanny, engaged in activities designed to keep them occupied during what everyone knew would be an emotionally charged hour. Through the walls, Catherine could hear their occasional laughter, a sound that felt both precious and surreal given what was about to happen. Charles's image appeared on the television screen, seated behind the desk where Catherine had seen him work on countless royal duties. But today he looked different, somehow both burdened and relieved, as if the weight of his decision had been crushing him, and he was finally able to set it down. "My fellow citizens of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth," Charles began, his voice steady but carrying unmistakable emotion. "Today I address you to inform you of a decision that has not been made lightly, but which I believe serves the best interests of our nation and our shared future." Catherine reached for William's hand as they listened to his father explain the reasoning behind his choice. Charles spoke about the changing nature of monarchy in the modern world, about the need for fresh perspectives and new energy, about his confidence in William's ability to lead the institution into the future. "The Prince of Wales has demonstrated throughout his life the qualities that our nation needs in its sovereign," Charles continued. "His commitment to service, his understanding of the challenges facing our country and our Commonwealth, and his vision for a monarchy that serves all people with dignity and compassion." When Charles mentioned the grandchildren, Catherine felt tears begin to fall. He spoke about George, Charlotte, and Louis with such tenderness, expressing his confidence that they would grow up understanding both the privileges and responsibilities that came with their heritage. The announcement concluded with Charles's expression of gratitude to the people who had supported him throughout his life, and his promise that he would continue to serve the nation in whatever capacity might be appropriate. When the screen went dark, the room fell into complete silence. It was Camilla who broke the quiet, her voice barely above a whisper. "Well," she said, "that's done then." But even as she spoke, Catherine could see that Camilla's composure was beginning to crack. The woman who had always been a pillar of strength, who had navigated decades of public scrutiny with grace and dignity, was starting to show the emotional toll of what they had all just witnessed. "I need some air," Camilla said suddenly, standing up with movements that seemed less steady than usual. Catherine watched through the window as Camilla walked out into the castle gardens, her figure small against the vast highland landscape. There was something about her posture that suggested she needed to be alone with her thoughts, to process what this moment meant not just for the monarchy, but for her personal life with Charles. "Should someone go after her?" William asked, concerned. Catherine continued watching Camilla's solitary figure. "Give her a moment," she said softly. "She's been carrying this burden alongside your father for months. She needs time to understand that it's really over." As they watched, Camilla's controlled walk gradually slowed, then stopped entirely near the rose garden that had always been her favorite spot at Balmoral. Even from a distance, Catherine could see the moment when Camilla's carefully maintained composure finally gave way. Her shoulders began to shake, and she sank onto one of the stone benches, covering her face with her hands. It was then that Catherine understood the full magnitude of what they had all just witnessed. This wasn't just about constitutional procedures or royal succession. This was about a family whose lives had just changed forever, about dreams deferred and new responsibilities accepted, about the complex emotions that came with making decisions that affected not just themselves, but millions of people around the world. William started toward the door, but Catherine caught his arm. "Let me," she said quietly. She found Camilla still seated on the bench, no longer crying but staring out at the mountains with an expression of profound exhaustion. Catherine sat beside her without speaking, understanding that sometimes presence was more important than words. "I never imagined it would feel like this," Camilla said finally. Relief and grief all mixed together. Catherine nodded, thinking about her own complicated emotions. "Everything changes now," she said. "Everything," Camilla agreed. Then, turning to look at Catherine directly, she added, "But you'll be magnificent. You already are." They sat together in the Highland air, two women who had found themselves at the center of one of history's most unique institutions, processing the reality that their lives had just been permanently altered by a decision that was already reverberating around the world. Behind them, the ancient castle stood witness to another chapter in its long story, while ahead of them stretched an uncertain, but undeniably significant future.